Welcome back, everyone. I'm really excited about this one. We're talking about compensation planning in emPerform, and more specifically, how it is a phenomenal tool that can completely get rid of all of the spreadsheets that you might be using for merit planning and bonus planning. So if this is something that's new to you, don't worry, that's what we're going to go over today. And if you have questions and want to get started, the nice thing is this module is included in emPerform. So with that, I'm not going to waste any time. I want to introduce you to your presenter. Lonnie Holmes is a senior implementation consultant here with emPerform. She has a background in accounting, and she is a compensation manager guru. So there is no one better to introduce you to this module and show you how it can work and the different options that you have. So over to you, Lonnie.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for the introduction, and welcome everyone. I know when we start talking about compensation, most HR folks get this pit in their stomach that makes them want to call in sick until it's over. So we're going to try and take that anxiety and dread away by simplifying your compensation process. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the compensation manager might look like. We're going to actually take a peek at it in emPerform so you can see sort of how it operates and functions. We're going to talk about what you would need to do to get started, and then what's involved in getting it set up. And of course, Natalie will be keeping our eyes peeled for some questions that we will answer at the end of the session as well. But put those in the panel and let's make sure we get your questions answered before the session ends today. So here's what we hear from HR teams when we talk about compensation. You know, their annual compensation process is incredibly tedious, it's manual, it's very time consuming, it consumes multiple people in their team, so it eats up a lot of resources within their group. It tends to be managed in a very error-prone structure in that we are using Excel files to manage them all. And that, while Excel is an incredibly powerful tool, it's also one that has its limitations when we're talking about handling processes within it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But one of the other things we hear more commonly from our HR teams is that they lack a formal compensation strategy. And what we mean by that is that there isn't an easy or clear measurable performance and reward correlation within their organization. So people don't know what the expectation is in terms of understanding how their increases are tied to their individual or corporate performance. It's not understood organization-wide, and so if there isn't really a formal compensation strategy there, it's hard for others in the organization to know and understand how merit increases are being awarded, which can sometimes create confusion around, you know, why this person may get more than others. And let's be honest, as much as we say compensation and payroll is a very confidential topic, it is probably the most talked about secret amongst employees and colleagues in an organization. So we want to create consistency. We don't want to give employees something to talk about in this respect. So by creating a strategy and an opportunity to create consistency across the board, then we have clear guidelines that people can use for the premise of giving these merit increases. And we can automate that exercise using emPerform's Compensation Manager. So let's talk about spreadsheets and why they are not ideal for the purposes of a compensation review process. Spreadsheets are amazing. As somebody who's worked in accounting my whole life, I'm a CPA, I love Excel. I lived in Excel for many years in my career, and it is a great and very powerful tool from a reporting perspective. What it is not great for is a processing tool. And what I mean by that is that when we talk about dealing with sensitive data or salary related information, a lot of the times when we're dealing with Excel, it's either, you know, being passed around because we're sending different versions of Excel files to different people for them to participate in the process, which can be very risky as we know. Now, I know some of that risk is being mitigated now by sort of cloud sharing folders and things like that and limiting who has access to that. But I do know, a lot of times people are still emailing files to respective, managers that need to participate in the comp process. And hey, one wrong letter could be sending that compensation file to the wrong person. So obviously there's some risk in there in terms of sensitive information being sent to somebody incorrectly. Let's talk about the time we spend creating and maintaining all of these separate Excel files. So here's a real life process. And I know this because in my past life, doing payroll, HR, and accounting, as a user, I was actually creating these exact spreadsheets. So it would look like this. We would have one giant spreadsheet with all the staff. They're probably grouped by departments. There's probably other elements that we sort or subtotal by, and we create this massive file that is probably generated from Excel-based links or formulas from other tabs within that workbook. And then what we do is we take that data and we then create a whole bunch of other files from it, because we don't necessarily want everybody to see everybody else's salary information that's participating in the process. We want managers to only see those people they're responsible for. So we're going to break out all those Excel spreadsheets into multiple files and send them to their respective parties. They're then going to populate all the information and do what they need to do, and they're going to send it back to you, and you're going to reconsolidate it back into that Excel file so that your executive team now has a big picture view of everybody who can then approve it. If this sounds familiar, it's a painstaking process and nobody likes it. It is subject to error, and if anybody who's worked in spreadsheets knows, if you have a formula row in a file and somebody deletes a row, well, my goodness, chaos. It will wreak havoc on all of your formulas and will just completely paralyze the system. So again, that process is very common in Excel because it's not meant for processes. So now we don't want to have to do that anymore. We're going to take that element away by removing Excel as the processing component. We're going to put it in emPerform's Compensation Manager. And you're going to see this in action very shortly, I promise. Okay, so those are some of the things that we're doing in Excel. Most of these templates as well, because we're dealing with multiple formulas and things that are coming across in multiple components, we may not necessarily have these templates that are in a format that's easily importable into a payroll or HRIS system in which that data resides. And that's simply because an import template is not always the most functional for people to use. So when we want to share these files with managers who are going to be participating in the process, if we share with them an import related template, they're going to be like, what is this? So we put it in a more functional format for them. But then again, we're taking that file and we're reformatting it or putting it into another file to allow us to easily make those changes in our payroll system or provide it to our payroll department. And then, of course, one of the biggest things about using Excel for this is there's no tracking on the status of where this process is. So especially if you have a more iterative approach to your compensation process, where you have a manager who does their initial recommendations or adjustments, then it goes to maybe their manager who reviews as a group whole and understands what that looks like. Maybe they make changes, and then maybe it's going into a VP or HR for a final review before it goes into your executive level review process. So all of those processes take time, and those Excel files are shuffling between people via email or sitting in a share folder, and we have no idea whose hands are on it at this point in time. And then if you have auditors, then you likely need to show the approval exercise has happened. So that's where email also becomes an element, because a lot of people are using the email train or chain to understand, hey, this person has approved it, or these folks have approved it, or this has been reviewed. So again, we want to take all of that out of Excel and Outlook and put it where it belongs. So that is how Excel is wonderful but terrible for process. Okay, so let's sort of stay with that theme. So how can we help you? How can emPerform's Compensation Manager really provide the tools you need to take your compensation process out of Excel? First of all, it's very consistent and it's streamlined, okay? In terms of compensation decision making, all the information that your managers would require to make decisions as it relates to merit and performance are easily accessible to them in the Compensation Manager. Okay, those performance results are actually linked right into that Compensation Manager. And we can use those performance scores as well as other pieces of information like your compa ratio to drive what you would recommend initially for increases based on those variables. And so we can actually provide your managers, hey, this is what the company or organization is recommending based on performance and potentially compa ratio. It is incredibly configurable, guys. So if you're using, and obviously everybody in this call is using the appraisal module in emPerform, you know how amiable and configurable this product is. And the Compensation Manager is no different. We allow you to add all sorts of elements of information that you may want for tracking or for decision making as it relates to comp. So, you know, if the data lives somewhere in your HRIS or payroll system and you want to share that data with your managers in emPerform, we can put it there. And some of those fields that are out of the box that we would have available to us are things like multi-currency. So if you have a multinational or international organization that deals in multiple payroll currencies, then we can accommodate that. You know, things like compa ratio, industry midpoints, all those things can be accommodated within the product. Workflows. So I talked a little bit about this in the previous slide about how, you know, we want to keep the process out of Excel and actually work it through a proper workflow auditable process. And that's, again, what emPerform can do for you here, in that we create a full-fledged automated workflow process that allows your compensation documents and recommendations to move through the individuals that are involved in the process and provide email notifications to them so that they know, hey, it's your turn, you need to do your part, take a look, provide your recommendations, and let's move it through the process. And obviously then you have full-fledged capability to understand where your compensation models are in the process as a result. And of course, as we talked about that wonderful spreadsheet and consolidating the data that comes back, guess what? emPerform has a consolidated data report that can be exported directly from the system. So these are some of the ways that emPerform's Compensation Manager can help you right out of the box. There is also a lot of other things the product can do for you that, you know, we can talk to each individual situation. So, you know, as part of this exercise, we talk about your specific process, and maybe there's other things we can accommodate that will make your compensation process that much easier and more streamlined moving forward. All right, so let's take a look. I know this is what everybody wants to see. They're like, stop talking, show us the goods. So this is where we're going to find compensation. So if you currently look at your own emPerform and you do not see this tab up here, that is likely because you are not currently using emPerform. emPerform makes you know, the homepage as succinct and clean as possible for your users. So they don't want to display a bunch of things up here that's not relevant to your organization. So you won't see this unless you actually have compensation models available in the system, and you'll only see this if you're somebody who participates in the compensation planning process. Okay, so I'm going to click on this compensation planning, and I in here am John, and I have access to two groups. So I manage two specific departments within my organization. And one of them I have already reviewed and done some work for and have moved it on to the executive above me to review my compensation adjustments. And so I can see very quickly what my statuses are in terms of that. And once this is complete, I'll be able to see as that's moving through the workflow process. But I have another group that I have not yet completed my side of the compensation for. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And it's going to open up our compensation grid. So we kind of refer this to, you know, we refer to this as the grid, and mostly because it kind of looks very similar to an Excel grid or table that you would probably be generating in Excel right now. It's a series of columns and rows that represent a bunch of pieces of information that are going to pull together and make your compensation process streamlined and easy. So the first thing you'll notice at the top was we have this beautiful timeline, very similar to what you see in appraisal. It shows you the steps in your compensation process and where we are in it. Below that, you'll see some notes and instructions. So these you can actually change from year to year. So if you have, different metrics or different measurements that are being used as a result of changes in industry or market that you want to be able to communicate to the managers that are participating in this process, you have a mechanism to do that. Then we get into the actual meat of our compensation model. And that is basically the list of employees that make up this administration group that fall under me that I'm responsible for completing adjustments for in terms of their increases. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing here. So this is a series of columns that make up all the information that I would perhaps require to make an informed decision about somebody's merit increase. So the first thing you're seeing in here is their performance score. This performance score in our setup here is actually linked directly to the appraisal form. So whatever scores live for these employees in their appraisal is exactly what's coming through here. Now, one thing that's important to note, I know many of our clients are no longer using sort of numbers in their appraisals. They're using text-based ratings, and that is completely fine. But the system still uses numbers for the mechanism of calculating this recommended component, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So in the actual compensation grid, it is going to show you the number that person scored, not necessarily the text-based rating, because it is using it for the math. Okay, so just so you know, your managers will then see what those text-based ratings represent in terms of a number in the compensation side. But note, this is not visible to anybody else unless they are participating in the compensation process as far as workflows and approvals go and providing recommendations. Nobody will see any of this information. Then we have what we call our reason codes. So these are actually managed by you. You get the opportunity to decide what types of reason codes you would like to provide in a list to your managers to select why they're giving an increase. Now, where this becomes, important, most people it's probably going to be merit, and we can default it so that it says merit for everyone. However, somebody may opt to give a more significant increase or change to someone's salary as a result of something else. And maybe they want to make note of that. Maybe they got promoted, they've been given a title change. Maybe it's a market adjustment. Maybe we've realized that their salary is actually sitting quite under market in terms of what's been assessed for them, and we want to sort of bring that back in line. So we can actually assign some other reason codes there. Then what you're seeing in green is a series of columns that are actually all tied to sort of one piece of information, so to speak. And that is what we refer to as the pay code. And you'll hear us talk about that when we go through compensation with you, but essentially you can have as many of these as you want. And we can actually show as many of these columns or hide them as you need. So if you are an organization that really does pay attention to where people sit as far as their midpoint goes for industry averages and have a compa ratio, and that is part of your recommendation structure, then we can show that information for their current salary and what it would look like for their new salary. If you do not use compa ratio and midpoints as part of your decision-making process and do not require those to be visible to your managers for decision-making on this, we can hide those columns. Okay, so we really do have the ability to make this as simple and as relevant to your organization's compensation process as needed. And then, of course, we have their current salary, and we have this recommended column. So this recommended column is grayed out, okay? It is a calculated column that is currently using our performance score and our compa ratio to determine what we would give this individual as a recommended increase. So from an organization perspective, what do we think is reasonable based on those parameters or variables to give them an increase? So you can see here, the system recommended, 1% for this particular individual based on their score and compa ratio. Okay, and some of these others got 0, and that's because their compa ratios are quite high, so maybe they're already sort of at the top end, but their performance score is, average. And then we have people who are performing at a higher level, so they're getting a little bit more even though their compa ratios are high. But these are what you get to structure. You get to decide what those rates are based on what range of score and what range of compa ratio makes sense for your variables. But the system makes these recommendations based on what the organization determines, but we're also giving, if you want, your managers some flexibility to change that or modify that. So you can see here, we've put in a recommendation of 402.50, and as a manager, I've gone in and entered 450. Okay, so I've given them just a slight bump. For this individual here, they weren't entitled to an increase. According to this, they're over their compa ratio. But, maybe this person has done something above and beyond that isn't necessarily related to core performance, but something else that we want to reward them for or provide some sort of incentive. So I'm going to give them that. Now, here's the beauty of this. I'm giving them a $1,300 increase even though the system recommended nothing. What I can do so that, those people above who are part of the approval process understand why I'm doing that, I can actually provide a note. So I can go into this comment field and I can write in whatever notes I want to the person above or to the approvers to let them know, hey, this is why I'm giving this person this increase. So it's not just a random number that shows up there. I can provide a justification around it. And what you'll notice is if I change some of these values, I'm going to change this one to 500. What you're going to see is my percentage change is also changing at the same time. These two fields work dynamically together. The reason why we have both is because you all know that some people like to work in dollars and other people like to work in percentages. So some people say, I just want to give them 2%. So they'd rather put in a 2 here and let the system calculate the dollars. Okay, and other people say, I want to give them a flat $800 and let the system calculate the percentage. Okay, so to each their own, they can do either or, and the system's going to manage both elements without a problem. As we're entering these changes, you'll notice that our new salary over here is also being dynamically calculated based on this value. So this is all changing to represent what their new salary would be based on the change if this were approved. Okay, and then of course, if there's any midpoints there, that's going to change based on that new salary. There's also a proration factor. Again, if your organization uses this, you can show this information in the grid. Basically, what we use this for is that if people are hired sort of midway through the year, and you still want to reward them with a merit increase, but maybe not at a full 100%, we can prorate it. Alternatively, you see we have one here at 1.25. Maybe that person got hired at the end of the previous cycle and wasn't, we weren't quite ready to give them an increase. They're still, sort of in their first few months of work. But we want to still record the fact that they've been with us this long. Then we can actually put in a proration factor a little higher. So that they can be rewarded for that time. So that is the salary component. So before I leave that side of it, I also want to say that it's really important that there may be other pieces of information that you feel are pertinent to your managers making these decisions other than just a score and compa ratio. Maybe they were already given an off-cycle increase this year. Or maybe they were promoted earlier in the year and they've already been bumped up to a salary that doesn't necessarily warrant them an additional increase right now. A lot of that information can still be tracked and made visible to your managers in here, but we don't want to clutter up this grid, right? We don't want to clutter up the table with a whole bunch of other columns because then you spend a lot of time doing this, right? Which can be kind of clunky and people don't like it. So what we've opted to do here is we create some pop-ups. And so there's another box over here beside our comment box. If I open that up in here, Okay, I can see some additional information in here. So when's the last time Ashley got a salary increase? What is Ashley's actual position right now? How long has she been with the organization? Okay, all of these things may be important pieces of information. You know, what was her last salary increase? All of this stuff may be important for your managers to know and understand before they make any final decisions about what increases they're going to give their staff. I also want to mention that what you're seeing down here is some other elements that we've built into emPerform's Comp Manager to help you from a budgetary standpoint. So we know that no company has infinite amounts of funds to pay staff. So we sometimes have to work within some parameters or restrictions in terms of how much money is being allotted. So the system actually allows you to create budgets by individual group. So each group could be given an allotted budget, and that can be either in a pool of money, a total for their total salary, or a percentage. We see most organizations when they're talking about, you know, merit increases, they're saying, listen, we're going to say the top out is 4% of budget. And so we can allocate 4% of current salary, and it's going to calculate what that 4% is. And we can give flexibility to allow managers to work outside of that if we want to, or we can restrict it, meaning that they can't go over and above that budgeted amount. And in order to see that, so just to show you what that would look like, if I actually were to change this to 1,500, okay, now you can see my budget appears over here in red. So it's notifying me, listen, you're over budget, you're probably going to need to make some adjustments up here. Now, again, if I've put in some restrictions here, the system likely won't let me submit this for approval to the next level. But if I don't have any restrictions specifically in here, then I can still submit it and let the people above determine whether or not I'm permitted to go over budget. And if I've got justifications in here, maybe that will be the case. Okay. In addition to salary increases, let's talk about some of the other things that we see people tracking for compensation. Because salary is really just one element of the compensation total that people see in a year. There can be things like sales commissions. There can be things like bonuses or profit sharing programs that organizations allow their staff to participate in. So this is a very simple one. We've basically just put in some percentages and dollars in here that we can drive, but we can actually do some different things with bonuses depending on what your structure is. Again, if it's, you know, performance based, we can base it on a percentage of salary based on performance to drive a bonus allocation. And then of course we can then tally up some of this stuff to pull in a total compensation number for those individuals. So you can sort of see what that looks like, and particularly around a budgeting component as well, so we can make sure that we're staying within budget. Once I've completed this as a manager, I can just simply hit submit up at the top. It's going to say, hey, do you want to send this to the executive for review? And I'm going to hit submit, and it's going to send it off to the next level or next person that is participating in the workflow exercise for them to review this. Now, you can make it editable to those people, or you can make it read-only and force them to send it backwards to the manager to make adjustments if they feel that changes need to be made, or they can simply approve it and move it forward. So there's lots of options there that we can work with on the workflow, much like you see right now in your appraisal process. You can also attach supporting documentation in here. So if you want to attach anything to your grid before submission, then you can attach things, and those approvers will be able to see that as well. Okay, so that is in a nutshell the compensation grid and all of the beautiful things that come along with it. Before I move on though, I want to show you one quick thing that your managers can take advantage of. Right now, I have entered a bunch of changes in here. These are what I'm doing personally. But let's just say as a manager, I've looked at what the organization has recommended, and I say, you know what, this looks good to me. This is what the company thinks works, then I'm not going to disagree. I can simply select everybody in here and click apply recommended ranges, and that is going to push these totals right into this change column for me. I don't have to then modify anything. I don't have to type or key anything. I can simply click this button, submit it, and I'm done. Okay, so if this is something that, you have managers that are just like, yeah, you know what, whatever the company recommends, I'm good with. This is a real quick and easy process for them. Click, click, done. So it doesn't get simpler than that, right? So before we sort of go back to the PowerPoint and I talk about what things you would want to consider before getting started with this, I want to show you sort of the golden goose, so to speak, of compensation, and that is what we call our group consolidation report. Okay, so as a manager right now, I can see my individual groups by themselves. But if I wanted to see collectively what my groups look like, I can do that. And so I'm going to just set some parameters in here in terms of what I want to see, and it's going to generate this report. Now this is super tiny, right? You're thinking, oh my goodness, I need a magnifying glass. Don't worry, it is exportable into any format you desire. So I'm going to actually dump this into Excel. And I'm going to click export, and it's going to drop that into an Excel file for me, which I'm going to open for your viewing pleasure. Okay, here is now my Excel file. So I'm going to make this a little bigger so everybody can see what we're seeing here. And basically all of the information you saw in our compensation table or grid now appears here, including all of the pop-up data. Okay, so nice, quick, and easy way to view the data and all the information. But here's the beauty of this. I can see my individual groups and their respective budgets and what's happened with those, what have we done, what changes did we make, but then I can see a group total. Okay, why this is important. So for right now, you're seeing this because this is one manager that has two groups. That's great, it's lovely. But think about this from the perspective of HR and your executive group that are reviewing and evaluating everybody in the organization. I can now provide them a report group by group that says, hey, this is what John's groups are getting. Here's what Sharon's groups are getting. Here's what Jake's groups are getting. And at the very bottom, have a grand total that says, here is what it's going to cost us this year in increases, and where we fell within that budget based on that. It also allows you the ability to take a look and make sure that assessments for increases are fair. We want to make sure that what we're evaluating across the system and what we're giving everybody across the organization for increases makes sense. That John's not being, overly generous with his staff while another manager is being really frugal with his, even though those people probably have very similar roles and have scored in a very similar manner. So it helps us make sure we are eliminating any of that disparity. All right, so that is what I wanted to show you. I know it's a very quick overview, and if you're interested, excuse me, in seeing more of that, we can definitely do more detailed overviews with you if you're interested.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lonnie. It's amazing. Every time I see the compensation manager module in action, it still drops my jaw. I don't think it's a secret that a lot of organizations struggle with distributing, collecting, formatting, consolidating all of these spreadsheets. So this is very timely. We do have a couple questions and we have about another 5 minutes. So I see you have a warning list here. So I'll let you go through that and then we can move on to some questions.
Yeah, so very quickly, these are things that you would want to consider if you're interested in getting started with the comp process. So we'll send these slides out. You'll be able to see these questions. And these are also questions we send to all of our clients who are considering compensation to get a sense of whether or not their process fits well with compensation out of the box. We will not recommend this to anybody that we don't think it's a good fit for. So, but these are some elements that you'll want to consider knowing and understanding about your business and be able to provide us some direction on to understand, can we use compensation out of the box and how would it work for us? And that's pretty much it. I've kind of talked about how we get started and what the steps are in terms of implementing comp. First and foremost, we do full requirements gathering with you. Then we do configuration and training. to get you up and started with that. So it's not as heavy a lift as appraisal is. While the data is more sensitive and more important in terms of validation, the actual setup of compensation is actually a much shorter duration of time. So if you're interested in getting started, please reach out to us.
Excellent. And yes, you can use the emPerform compensation management module and it doesn't affect your subscription costs. It's included in emPerform as part of our full suite. I will say there are some professional services attached because it's about 2 days of setup and training with you. I don't think I need to explain why. There's a lot going on in the back end that we want to make sure is set up properly. You could roll it over. It's tested. So if you are interested, get in touch, support@employee-performance.com, or just contact your emPerform representative. So Lonnie, let's get into some questions. I have some really good ones. Do you have anything for geographical modifiers in the compensation grid?
Depending on what you're looking for, if you're talking about being able to track geographical or industry standards in terms of min, mids, and max and things like that, the system doesn't feed directly from a geographical or from a system that will generate those values for you. Now, what I will say is if that data lives somewhere in your current HRIS or you have access to it, any piece of information can live in the grid. It simply can be imported or integrated.
Excellent. Okay, so this one's long, but it's good. Is it possible to only give access to the compensation review tool to managers at a certain level and up? Or if turned on, will all managers have access?
Yes, so the answer is that you can give access to only those you want to have access. So what you'll know about your appraisal side is you have what we call review roles. So you have like a manager, an employee, maybe a second level manager, etc. Compensation actually uses its own separate set of review roles for that exact reason, because just because somebody's a manager for appraisal purposes doesn't necessarily mean they're a manager for the purposes of compensation overview. So we allow you to create your own review roles for compensation and assign those levels of management that would participate in the process.
Excellent. Can you set the base rate at a percentage and then have recommendations based on performance and comp ratio built onto that base increase?
No, so it will always base the percentage calculation on the current salary. That's how it's built. Now, with that said, that's how the system works out of the box. We have a lot of clients that have more complex structures that use sort of multi-tier, multi-factor, or as you mentioned, sort of base rate plus, because some people will give COLA plus a merit. So we've actually built in some additional enhancements for them specifically to allow them to manage that within the compensation model.
Great. Okay. And at the end of our compensation process, we provide a compensation summary to each staff member, which is done through mail merge. It's quite time consuming. Does emPerform have something to help with that part?
Yes, oh my gosh. So mail merges are the worst. I know everybody I talk to complains about this. What comes with your implementation with the compensation module is not only our wonderful consultants that are going to help you build it, but we also customize one compensation statement or summary for you that you can then distribute to your staff. So it can include any field that lives in emPerform. So if you have the data in emPerform, we can draw it out on that statement, and then you can provide that information very easily by simply generating a report. We can even hang it on the front end of emPerform, so if you want employees to be able to print their own compensation statements themselves, we can also do that through a small enhancement.
Excellent. All right. Well, we have a minute left, so I'm just going to let everybody know that if you're interested, send us an email. We have a compensation manager requirements questionnaire of about 6 or 7 questions that'll give us the basics of what we need to know to determine that, yes, this will be a fit, and then to have the further discussion. So send us an email anytime right after this meeting. We'll get back to you right away because this module saves a lot of time and it's very configurable. So Lonnie, thank you so much for presenting that. We have 2 more sessions after this, guys. The next one is with me, and it's on check-ins with employees. After that, Lonnie's coming back to show us around the 9 box. So 2 other 30-minute kind of rapid-fire sessions. That will be great. And at 4 p.m., we're going to wrap up the day with a nice summary as well as our live draw for those Amazon gift cards. Don't forget, there will be a short survey that pops up after this. Take 20 seconds to fill that in. Not only does it help us to improve these presentations, but you also get your name into that draw in extra time. So thank you all so much for joining, and we'll see you in about 5 minutes.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.